It's all done.
Perfect. So welcome everyone to today's professional development on evaluation eligibility in IEP under developmental delay in preschool. I'm going to turn this over to Jackie Hersom and Laura. They are going to be presenting today.
Thank you, Tricia. And Laura's going to share her screen. Thank you. So as you just heard today, we're going to be focusing on evaluation, eligibility, and the IEP under the eligibility category of developmental delay for early childhood special education. And slide. And presenting today will be myself, Jackie Hersom. I'm an early childhood special education coordinator on the transition team, and Laura Mellitz, who is joining me. She is an early childhood special education program manager for Child Development Services. For our presentation objectives, for the first half of the slides, we are seeking to provide participants with an overview of developmental delay as an eligibility category for early childhood special education. And then we will describe the criteria, tools, and methods used for determination. For the second half, we'll provide participants with examples of compliance and best practices when considering and applying this eligibility category in the IEP development process and with determining programming. Okay, so first we'll start with the definition and user for developmental delay for children ages 3 to 5. So a child with a disability aged 3 to 5 may include a child experiencing developmental delays in one or more of the following areas: physical development, cognitive development, communication development, social or emotional development, or adaptive development, which is those self-help skills, and who, by reason thereof, needs special education and related services. And I wanted to point out some key factors to start out with, because these are going to be big takeaways for you today. One is that the measured delays must be so significant as to adversely affect the child's educational performance or achievement in their educational setting, and that the child does not achieve or perform at a level commensurate with that of their typically developing children of the same age. And the other is every effort will be made to identify a child's primary disability under one of the other Part B eligibility criteria, reserving developmental delay for those situations in which a clear determination cannot be made under any other category. And the last one that I didn't put on the slide, I'm kind of kicking myself for not putting it on the slide, is that for a 5-year-old who has transitioned from early childhood special education to a public school and who has been determined eligible under developmental delay by CDS, and for whom the IEP team cannot achieve consensus on Part B criteria for the kindergarten year, that SAU may continue the eligible child under developmental delay criteria for that year, their kindergarten year, and that's consistent with MUSER. So let's talk about what tools we use to evaluate this. Developmental delay is determined through the use of standardized measures intended to examine all 5 areas of development, which are again displayed here: communication, cognitive, adaptive, physical and motor, or social emotional. Here we show 2 such recommended evaluation tools: the Battelle Developmental Inventory 3, or the BDI, and the Developmental Assessment of Young Children, or the DAYC. The evaluation should be administered by a trained, qualified special educator. The Maine DOE is currently providing training for these evaluation tools. All right. Criteria for identifying significant delays are scores of at least 1.5 standard deviations below the mean in at least 2 of the 5 listed domains that we talked about in the last slide, or 2 standard deviations below the mean in 1 of the 5 listed domains. The composite standard score of the overall domain will be used to determine a standard deviation below the mean in a developmental area. Please note that the identification of a young child with developmental delay must include the consideration of an observation in the learning environment to document educational performance and behavior in the areas of difficulty, as well as to inform determination of adverse effect. That observation will be conducted by a special educator other than the child's current provider. And lastly, to be eligible, it must be determined the child requires special education in order to progress in their development. So when is the determination not developmental delay? We always want to try to identify a child's primary disability to best serve their unique strengths and needs. However, when the team is unable to do so, the evaluations and data show that a child meets the specific criteria and none of these listed exclusions apply, Maine currently allows the determination of developmental delay for children until the end of kindergarten. And these are the criteria for it not being determined developmental delay. The first is the child has a recognized disability such as autism, speech or language impairment, other health impairment, etc. And that's based on results of evaluations. The second is results of evaluations determine a disability exists in one or more of the other 13 categories of disability. The third is there is no adverse effect on participating in general education programming. And the fourth is that accommodations would be enough to support this child's progress. So next we'll be talking about the IEP, including the adverse effect form, functional versus developmental, needs and how statements, developmental goals, and programming in the least restrictive environment. So we're going to shift from our overview of what developmental delay is and how it is determined into how it's applied when developing a preschool-aged child's IEP. To present that information, we have asked Laura Mellitz, one of the CDS experts on developmental delay, to join us, and I will hand it over to Laura.
Thank you, Jackie. So I'll be going over today the adverse effect form. I'll talk a little bit about what functional is versus developmental in terms of goals and those sections of the IEP, how to develop those needs how statements for children under developmental delay, and then also talk a little bit about programming options in least restrictive environment. So first, I'm going to talk about the form for the determination of adverse effect on educational performance. So these are some of the sections on that form that the evaluations we've talked about would be applicable to. So your BDI and your DAISY, or the Battelle Developmental Inventory, and the Developmental Assessment of Young Children would fall under number 1, where you talk about those different developmental domains. If you use any other evaluation tools to get some baseline information, those evaluations would fall into section 3, where you talk about functional performance. And I just included there a list of some of the tests we use mostly with the preschool-aged population. Your observation results would go in number 4, where you talk about those early learning guidelines. Oops. If you use the DECA for some social emotional information, that would fall under number 9, where you talk about those social emotional deficits. For adverse effect, you would talk with your team about whether or not the results of those evaluations demonstrates an adverse effect. If it does, you would move on to the next question and determine whether or not they require special education services or if accommodations would be enough to support them in their learning. And based on your answer for that would determine whether or not they're eligible. If they do require special education services, then they would meet the criteria for developmental delay. If accommodations are enough, then they would not require an IEP or special education services. And then in the last box, you would describe or explain why you found that child eligible or not eligible based on the information and your team discussion.
Laura, we have a question about the adverse effect form.
Sure.
So the question in the chat is, wouldn't you put speech under the section for communication on the adverse effect form?
You could. A lot of these evaluation tools could fall in different, in some of the different questions. I often put it under functional performance, but communication would make sense for that information as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions about that?
Not at this time.
Okay. So just some reminders for the adverse effect form. It would be completed by the IEP team whenever you're determining eligibility or changing eligibility. And that would include if you are dismissing them from special education services. And then you would document the use of that form in your written notice and attach it to your written notice. Let's talk a little bit about functional versus developmental. So functional performance refers to a description of the child's ability to complete routine activities in relation to their functioning in the school environment. Whereas developmental performance refers to how the child is functioning in a developmentally appropriate curriculum and activities that would align with the state of Maine early childhood learning guide and development standards. So that may be in a preschool classroom, but it may also be in another developmentally appropriate setting or activities, and how well they're performing with those expected tasks. So how do you determine on an IEP if a goal would fall under functional or developmental? The primary difference here is whether or not you feel the child is able to outgrow those skills. So functional skills would be those deficits that you expect to be lifelong, that the child would not outgrow or is not likely to outgrow. Whereas developmental goals would be more of those lagging skills where you feel the child is likely to outgrow them at some point. A lot of times for our preschool children, especially under developmental delay, we would start out assuming that, that it's a developmental skill that they could outgrow. Though, like with anything else, there are times where functional would be considered a more appropriate choice. So let's talk a little bit about how you would fill out those developmental needs house statements. This is where you sort of talk about the different lagging skills, how that's impacting them in the classroom, and then what they need to work on. So you would start with that group of skills that are delayed. In this example, I chose expressive language skills. You would then move on to explain how that delay is impacting them in the classroom. So for this example, the expressive language skills are adversely affecting the child's ability to share his or her wants, needs, ideas, experiences, and knowledge. And then behind that, you would put the bulleted list of goals or needs that are related to that skill area. So for this example, this child had 2 goals: using words to express wants and needs, and expressively labeling a variety of pictured objects. So then you put it all together to create your needs house statement. So for example, using that example on the previous slide, it would say Jill's delay in expressive language skills adversely affects her ability to share her wants, needs, ideas, experiences, and knowledge with her teachers and peers. She needs to work on, and then those bulleted list of goals, using words to express her wants and needs, and expressively labeling a variety of pictured objects. When you're writing developmental goals, you want to think about those 1 skill deficits. So you pick 1 skill per goal. And then you want to make sure that it's measurable with specific measurements, and that the data is collected through a variety of means, whether that's teacher checklist, observations, progress reports, work samples, a variety of information to pull that together. So here are the different developmental domains and some of the skills that you may want to work on in those domains. So for example, physical would be things like walking, running, balancing, ball skills, jumping, things like that. Cognitive skills could involve problem solving, peer interaction, self-initiation, or similar type of goals. Communication would be articulation, things like following directions, answering questions, taking turns in conversation, grammar, and other similar goals. Adaptive skills would be addressing those self-care skills, toileting, hand washing, eating, dressing, and other self-care needs that would be in a classroom setting. And social emotional would work on things like peer interaction, play skills, self-regulation, and more of the pragmatic pieces of communication. So again, some points to ponder. Consider the broad developmental areas and then look at where the skill deficits or gaps are. So let's talk a little bit about programming and what that could look like. There was a question that was posed to us around what programming could look like for a child that's been identified through developmental delay. As with any other category, a child is unique, presents with their own strengths and needs. The same would be true under developmental delay. Your programming wouldn't be based just on that identification of developmental delay. You're going to want to look at things like their strengths and needs. You're going to want to look at those 5 different developmental domains to look at those skill deficits. Develop your goals based on those deficits, and then talk about what services or educational settings may be appropriate for the child to make expected progress. IDEA does require school districts to have a continuum of placement options to meet the individual needs of students with disabilities and serve children in the least restrictive environment. And that also includes children under developmental delay and preschool-aged children. Special education and related services could be provided directly in a preschool, daycare, Head Start, or pre-K classroom using a push-in model, which would be the least restrictive. Or you could use it you could provide those services at one of those same programs, but use a pull-out model. That would be a little bit more restrictive. You could choose to do some services in a clinic setting or a special education classroom. That's a little bit more restrictive again. And in some cases, it may be appropriate to do services in a home or hospital setting, which would be the most restrictive. So there's still, like any other category, quite a variety of options to choose from and how to best meet the needs of each child. And now we can open it up for any further questions.
Laura, there is a question in the chat back on the adverse effect form, and what could number 4 on that form look like? Question
Number, let me go back to that slide. So number 4 is where you would put in your observation results. So you would explain what was observed to be of adverse effect for the child, or the skills that they had difficulty with that may impact them in a classroom setting. Does that answer the question?
Well, it was talking about using measurements of indicators from the early childhood learning guidelines. So that's what I was, I guess, more gearing towards, of like, what is there for measurement tools for that?
That's a little bit more, that number 4, the way we use it is a little bit more subjective, I guess you would say. It's really just looking at the observation and noting the areas. There's a question on the observation that talks about adverse effect and where was a difficulty seen in the classroom, or what skills were observed to be below their same aged peers. And you would just do like a summary there of what was observed. Like 2 or 3 sentences. It doesn't have to be super long.
And also, Michelle, for this, I know for CDS, one of the things that we would do to kind of tie it to MELDS at the time, but now the PMELDS, the preschool MELDS, is we would take and kind of do a crosswalk on our observation sheet between whatever the skill we're seeing, whatever skill gap we may be observing, and note that, but then put it next to it, put the piece from the MELDS, the area that we're concerned about. And so we'd have that to refer to understand it better.
Right.
Okay, thank you. The other one I just had a question about was the functional and the developmental, and it's probably more a philosophical question, but Because when kids enter kindergarten, we have to change them from developmental delay to another category. There is no developmental delay options at that point. So why do we why is there a magical switch?
That's a great question. Actually, on the IEP, the developmental and functional goals print in the same place. The only place that's really different is in the needs how statements. They're separated there. Again, it just comes down to looking at it. Do you think the child's going to outgrow that deficit or not? And if you think that there's a chance that they're going to outgrow that, you would go under developmental to start with, especially if they're under developmental delay.
Well, and I get it if they're under developmental delay, but if we end up identifying them, I don't know, other health impaired, well, let's just say, but there could still be skills that they could hopefully, grow out of,
Right.
And obviously with an IEP, I mean, the goal is to make progress all the way up through. So we're hoping it's something that they could eventually not need. That's the ultimate goal. So
Right.
it's kind of, to me, it seems weird to have that. So because for the other kids, we're not supposed to put stuff into developmental delay, even though it could be.
Hey, Jackie, this is Susie. I was just thinking that I was recalling that you said that the child could stay under the category of developmental delay in kindergarten if the IEP team felt like that was still appropriate.
Yes, you beat me to it,
Correct.
Susie. I was trying to click on my unmute button. Yes, Michelle, Muser does allow developmental delay to be expanded through the kindergarten year if the IEP team is having difficulty finding that primary disability. And IDEA also says that up until the age of 9, that children can continue under developmental delay. In the state of Maine, we're still at 5, but there are talks about the possibility of expanding that, but currently it is per Muser allowed for you to continue under developmental delay if the team is having difficulty finding that primary disability.
Right. So, but what happens is if I have a kid that's under developmental delay, and let's just say that, we do assessments because we have to reassess in kindergarten, and I always, wait till the very end of the school year to try to, give them as much time as possible. But if they were still developmental delay when they're in kindergarten, we don't get a child count for them. And it's a child count issue because now they've gone into first grade. So even though you kept them there in kindergarten, you either are going to be able to identify them or not. So it's a bit of an issue.
Yeah, that might be something that we could talk to the data team to ask about whether or not there's a certain date by which the child that you could remove that eligibility category and then be able to get counted as a first grader. Stephanie, did you have something to say?
Yeah, so what we've done, and I think this has been what's recommended, is before the end of the kindergarten year, you may reevaluate that child to then determine if there's a different eligibility criteria that they would meet. And if so, then the team determines that is the criteria moving forward. So when kids come into us under developmental delay, we explain that to the parent. We'll take the IEP, and by spring of kindergarten, they're going to have a reevaluation.
Right.
There's probably a cutoff date that the state uses.
It's 6/30 is the last date because July 1st starts the new fiscal year. So if we reevaluate and the child isn't meeting under a category, because sometimes it's OT that's a challenge, but OT isn't a service that stands by itself for motor skills. So then the kid doesn't qualify for services.
Right. That's correct.
And that's it's this, but hearing that they could stay under developmental delay, it really doesn't work that way. I mean, we can carry them into kindergarten, but we do have to reassess. And they're either going to continue to qualify or not. We can't just say, oh, we're going to table, determinations, or we're going to keep them developmental delay. And then you can't reassess again, because then you're going to get the practice effect based on some of those assessments.
You are correct, Michelle. And I do think that's something that is being looked at to see if that developmental delay category can be extended beyond the kindergarten year.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions for our presenters? You can either type it in the chat or unmute.
So I do have another, this is Michelle again, I'm full of questions, I'm sorry. So previously, the message that I had gotten from the CDS team that I work with is like, if they have a kiddo that qualifies under speech and language, and let's just say they had some OT needs, they could not identify them under speech and language. They had to identify them under developmental delay.
That's correct. OT would have to be related to that speech and language disability in order for them to be under speech and language and get both speech and OT.
And I get that, but oftentimes, you know, motor skills impacts articulation a lot.
Oh, yeah, that could be a situation where you may find that there is a relationship, especially if the child has like apraxia of speech or something like that.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was understanding that correctly. Thank you.
Yep.
Can I ask a question that's kind of not related to identification necessarily? What do we do? Does abbreviated school days apply to this age group? Do we need to be concerned about that? Like,
Can you repeat that question, please, Pat?
we had a training on abbreviated school days, and my question is, because we're now a 3 to 12 school, do abbreviated school rules apply to 3 and 4-year-olds?
They do, because they're now part of your, if you're in a cohort 1 or 2 and they're part of your school district, those rules do apply.
So even if they're only in school for 2 half days, we have to try to come up with a plan to get them into school full time?
Nope, their program, if you said in your IEP, their program is 2 half days, that is full time for that student.
Okay, that's what I need to clarify. Okay. All right, thank you.
Can I just, hello everybody, I'm sorry, I'm in my car because I couldn't stay where I was, but to clarify that, if the general education program is full day, full week, and the IEP team determines that they're on a shortened day, I think that is something we want to get back and have clarified language for, because my understanding was those abbreviated day determinations are problematic. But I'd like to come back with an answer for that.
That would
Thank
be
you.
great, because I have a student that's in our pre-K program that is half days.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
So it's whatever the full school day is for a non-disabled child. So if you have preschoolers or pre-K children in your school who are going full day, then the disabled child with an IEP should also have access to full day. And if they're on abbreviated day, that's when those abbreviated day would apply.
So what if I have other placements that, like, kids just go half days, because they're, it's a daycare setting or something like that, and there's being a placement made there, and it's determined that half day is appropriate for the child because they have speech and language 2 times a week.
If the IEP team has determined the length of the child's school day is half days, then that would be the full time. And if you're offering less than that to a child for some other reason, that would be falling under the abbreviated school days. That's my understanding.
So what if it's parent choice to only have their, because like kindergartners in our district, parents have a choice of, I only want my child to attend half day. Like, what if it's parent choice?
It sounds like there are a lot of different sort of situations that we want to kind of talk through scenarios. And so I think that one of the primary questions is, what is your district's pre-K program? But I think what I hear you also asking is, yes, we offer pre-K classes, but we're also working in the mixed delivery system and have private partnerships that students programming in those private ships is less than or is different from what is offered in the SAU. Is that correct in terms of those two different scenarios?
Yes.
Okay. How about if we huddle up and make sure that we're really crystal clear so that we're not giving any information that could be misconstrued, because I want to make sure that we're clear on all of those. That's okay.
That would be greatly appreciated.
Okay.
There's another question in the chat that's kind of on a different topic a little bit that I'm going to look to Jackie. So not quite on topic, but is it correct that we will receive a COAST document with students' entry data if CDS found them eligible before they transition to the SAU, which I know that is correct. And then she asked, when will they see this document?
Yes, you are correct. CDS will provide those for you, and you should be getting those as soon as it's just, I think you should be getting them right after they're established, I believe, Trisha, right? Was what we had all decided. So if you have not received those, please reach out to your CDS site director and let them know so that they can make sure that you get those right away, because you should have received those.
And I think, Jackie, in terms of the form, we are going to be sending out a form that the schools can use to mark that data, the entry scores and the exit scores for each of their students. And we're creating those right now. I think the question is whether or not, as a child is leaving CDS, is that score considered the exit score, or is that score considered the entry score? So I think that depending on when that score was determined and how much time has lapsed between the time when that last score was made, the district would have to decide whether or not to use that score as, or consider that as their determining and rating that child on that entry score in their district. Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand that a lot better now. Thank you. And I think this has come up recently. It was under a lot of discussion too about whether or not we would provide an interim score or if we would find another way to get you a score. I don't know what was decided. That's a Dan Hemdahl question for what practice he wanted the CDS sites to do. But as soon as I find that out, I will make sure that you all are aware of what the practice will be.
Any other questions before we turn it over to Jennifer Hopkins, who has a few updates and reminders? I don't see any, so you're all set, Jen.
All right, this is a quiet group today. So just a couple updates. Sandy wanted me to pass along to everybody. She just wants to verify if any of you have any unmet needs currently, to please reach out to me. We can schedule a meeting and try to do some brainstorming on how to get all the children their services. The other item was November meetings, but I just went back and looked, and we do not have a meeting the week of Thanksgiving, so we should be all set. We have 2 meetings in November. One will be in I believe it's the second the timing of it, we should be all set Thanksgiving week to not have to worry about it. Sandy wanted me to double check on that. And just a reminder on child count, I thank you all for getting it into me. We do have some SAUs that it's still lingering out there. Just a reminder that the longer it takes to receive the child count, it'll take that much longer to get the funds to you. So just keep that in mind that come January 1st, it would be great to be able to have those perhaps like maybe a week before or before you head out on vacation so we can get that funding to you as quickly as possible. And our next, I think I just saw a couple questions pop into the chat. Susie, were you putting something in there? Oh, you're muted, Susie.
I just put in that the 2 dates that we have scheduled for the next 2 cohort meetings are November 12th and the 19th, a week apart. So we moved the one that was right before Thanksgiving. We moved it a little earlier.
Perfect, thank you. And then I just want to open it up to the group to share any positive stories that you might have had since taking on the FAPE services for the little ones. If you've had any success stories, family stories that anyone would like to share.
I have a little one that came in and he was originally slotted to be in a special purpose private school. And we've brought him into our 4-year-old program and had a slot for him with ed tech support. And he is doing fabulous. Need working on toileting, not even willing to sit on the toilet, but we were talking about a plan today to shape that behavior and maybe some other tools, because it might be, maybe he doesn't like, we got to figure out why he doesn't want to be on the toilet, sit on the toilet. So, maybe it's because his feet are dangling. So maybe we need a step stool so he can touch and, those type of things. So, but really excited for this young man.
Wonderful. Anyone else have any positive stories to share? I hope there's some positive stories out there.
Sure. I have 2. I have great relations with my community partners. I can say that I had a community partner who has a BCBA came in and did an observation of one of my students in my in-district program who was really having a hard time. We had sort of taken and done sort of everything we could do in district and just worked really fluidly with our team and with the great grandparent who parents the child, and moved quickly and efficiently with the family, with touring and meeting, and is really responsive to the family and going to be able to get him started without a big delay. And that was just great to have that resource available for that little guy who's just been through a ton of trauma. And then just great partnership with CDS, and really excited for the opportunities that they're creating for our kids who need, again, more intensive resources, because that's where we're really lacking in our area. But so glad to be partnering with CDS. Really feel like they are responsive to what we've needed and just doing their best. We may not always have the exact answer right away, but definitely feel heard and feel seen and feel like we have a partner, which is great.
Wonderful.
I did drop in the chat if anybody has a pre-K only PT that's looking for a partner. I have a pre-K only PT that's brand new to coming back to actually the district she went to school in, who's just feels maybe a little lonesome in the work and would like to just connect with another OT who's doing this work with, professional questions now and then, somebody they could chat with. If you have that person, maybe we could connect I'm Christine Smith at csmith@msad17.org. Thanks.
Thank you.
I know maybe you didn't recognize me. I have new glasses on. Just
I
being
like
silly.
them.
Oh, thanks. Just being silly.
Anyone else want to share? Well, thank you all for all your hard work. We've been meeting with many of you, having your MOU meetings, and it's been great hearing your feedback and helping you through the initial couple months. It will get easier. By the end, you won't want to have MOU meetings with us anymore because you'll just know it all. So we appreciate all the hard work you've been putting in. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks.